Okay, everybody. So please head over to the stream that is in the description.
I think we're here.
And
Yes, it seems to be working. Good evening, everybody. Let's see if we can get Florian on board as well.
yes, let me see. I'll just have to come in here. Hey, everybody. So it's tricky.
How many years of streaming online only meetings have we had? And we're still really bad at this, all of us. Okay. Yeah, welcome everybody. This will be the first Q&A to go with our book, Thinking in SwiftUI, that we just pre-announced, well, the update. Yeah, we maybe just to give a quick intro about what happened there for us is we always wanted to update the book. We never really got around it. And then we had all these online workshops with all kinds of different teams. And that really taught us a lot, like just preparing for them, but then also the questions we got. And like every workshop, we tried to improve our explanations a little bit. And at some point we realized that we're like all these incremental explanations sort of really added up. And the book was really getting outdated, like not in the sense that the material was wrong, but just that we could explain it a lot better, at least we think. And so that's why we decided to completely rewrite everything. And yeah, that's why we're here tonight. And yeah, so we figured we could just take questions and talk a little bit about what we wrote. And so the first chapter we wrote is about Viewtrees, which is basically a concept. I mean, it's there, but we made it very prominent because we believe this is understanding Viewtrees is really core to understand SwiftUI. We think it's super important. And the moment you sort of get that, the layout makes more sense, the state makes more sense, animations even make more sense. When you understand, when you have a really good grasp of how these view trees work, how they turn into render trees, or as Apple calls them, attributes, graphs, and that's the first chapter. And
I wanted to, Chris, let me jump in there quickly. Before we go deeper into the content, I want to say something about why we chose this route of doing this kind of pre-release format of a chapter at a time, although it's basically just a new edition of an existing book. So that really originated from the fact that we basically just finished up the entire rewrite of the book shortly before WWDC happened. And so we wanted to, actually we got new things in SwiftUI this year that are significant enough for the content we have in our book that we didn't want to just release the book in its current state. And so we said, okay, let's do a chapter at a time, kind of a pre-release phase while iOS 17 and the rest of it is in beta. And then this gives us time to basically dive into the new things that kind of overlap with each chapter. And then we will have some time to write something about the new stuff that we got this year, in addition to what we have iOS 16-wise basically already in the book. And so just to make this work time-wise, we decided to just go for a chapter at a time. We'll do that, I don't know, perhaps every week, perhaps every 10 days. It will depends a little bit how this turns out, also with copy editing, getting everything ready. But that's basically the reason why we chose this format for this new edition of the book.
Yeah. And yeah, we did a little bit more. So when we've been writing books for almost 10 years now, I think, with when we started with functional Swift, and back then we started with a LaTeX setup and Pendock, which is this massive tool, and like it's really cool. Pendock takes any kind of text format; it doesn't really matter, like Markdown or Word or RTF or what have you, and it turns it into any other kind of text format, including PDF. And so we had this really complicated setup where everything was Markdown, and then we parsed it and we turned that into more Markdown and filtered it and executed Swift code and so on. And it basically, we always managed to make it work on at least one computer, but also at most one computer at most times. And so while it's really cool, it was also very frustrating. And then we thought like, okay, now that we know SwiftUI so much better, we want to do all these diagrams and all these integrations. Like, could we somehow, like go through NS attributed string or attributed string and use TextKit to render the book? And we had some help also from Martin to turn that into multi-page PDFs with headers and footers. And so we rendered we are currently rendering the entire book through Cocoa. And this is so much fun because we can do very elaborate styling if you want to, and integrate all these SwiftUI diagrams. So all the diagrams you see in the book are directly generated from the source. So we don't have a separate drawing tool. Like, this is all SwiftUI. And I think it's always a little bit of a guess how much of a good idea that is. Now it's really fun, and like, let's see in a year when we have to update this code or when something gets deprecated. But for now, it seems like a lot of fun. Yeah.
And I'm just pulling out a current version of all the contents that we have in there. So maybe we can show something what's coming. So there's a lot of course, there's a lot of content for all the other chapters that are not released yet there already, like in the iOS 16 state, and some of it is not copy edited yet, and there's some things to finish up. But we can show you some of the more graphical things, maybe like the illustrations, all the stuff we have in there. But I'll have to get this to work here, and perhaps I will just paste the updated stream URL once more so that people can actually pick this up here. Maybe Chris, you can continue while I'm posting this.
I'll answer a first question.
Yes.
So there's a question by Kyle asking about how the environment propagates in Sheets and other models. And it used to not propagate at all. And according to the blog post now, at least it propagates initially, but the sheet doesn't get updates from the environment. And the question is this a bug? Is this intended? I think it's a bug, and probably the SwiftUI team considers this a bug. We don't know. Like, first of all, we don't know anything officially about SwiftUI, and we don't have direct access to any of those things. So we can just guess. But my guess is that this would be a bug. And basically, when you have a sheet in SwiftUI, and with a lot of these controls, there's some kind of hosting controller in between. So this is when basically a UI view controller or something like that appears. And anytime that happens, things break. Like, that seems to be the major weak point currently of SwiftUI in my eyes. So this happens with Sheets. This used to happen a little bit with navigation, with other modals. And basically, there's like this barrier, right? Like, anytime there's a hosting controller, you might have problems from the environment going down into your sheet. You might have problems with preferences that you want to propagate out of your sheet. You might have problems with traits or with alignment guides or all of these things. And so all these hosting controllers, they can make life pretty problematic, I would say. So that's, hopefully an answer to question 3. I don't have a good solution for how to fix that. So I'm just going to close that issue as we speak, and then, yeah.
Maybe in the meantime, we can pick up another question from the chat. There was a question from, well, I don't know how to pronounce that. Lee0R, I don't know. Were there any major changes to the Viewtree architecture from the first version of SwiftUI?
Should I answer it? Yes.
You can start.
I would say no. So I think, at least for us, so we started writing this book directly after SwiftUI got announced, like the first version. And I would say we understand SwiftUI a lot better, but I think like nothing major has changed from the initial design. So things have, like they have added things, for example, like the layout protocol and the way state works is a little bit different, especially now in iOS 17, but also state object didn't used to exist. And things were named a little bit differently, but views were views before, and the way that trees were built up and the way the layout system works and all the other stuff, that sort of has never changed. And which is, you know, I think it's an amazing design, to be honest. Like there are flaws for sure, and everybody who has used SwiftUI in production will know. But I think it's really, it has how do you say that in English? It has stood up to the test of time really well.
And perhaps with relation to this first chapter, the Viewtree chapter that we have in there, this is really basically everything we described there was true from the first version, I'd say, right? So like how to read your SwiftUI code so that you can visualize the tree that's built up there and how this translates into however you want to call it. We always call it the render tree or the attribute graph behind the scenes. And yeah, so all this stuff basically hasn't changed at all, I would say. And so that's also this content that was basically in the book before, right? From the Viewtree chapter. It wasn't specifically laid out in one chapter. It was kind of distributed more. And but we really consolidated this stuff into this first chapter because we think it's that important, and also added a lot more or just changed the way also we approach that, how we explain that, because we noticed that that this really helped when we taught these workshops. So yeah.
The other question from the chat is what do we think about TCA? And we don't really have a good opinion on it because we never really tried it. I think I can speak for Florian as well. It looks really cool and people really like it. And I think people are generally very happy using it. We try to really understand SwiftUI, and that's already hard enough, like without an abstraction. And yeah, so for us with a small team and with the work we do, it doesn't make that much sense. But one of the things we were hoping to do at some point in the future is to take a single app and rewrite it in a number of architectures, including TCA, of course. And I think by that time we'll have something sensible to say about it. I just know that the people behind it are very smart, and anybody who has looked at what they do in the sort of the open source part also, the point free people are just doing such a good job there. Like I always want to be better at open source, and I think we suck at open source. Like we're not very good, and they're the opposite. So yeah, even if there's something that's not good about it, they'll make it better.
Yeah. Let me, before we go to the next question, let me pull up the rendered PDF of the book that we currently have. So I will try to share my screen here, or share the window. So let's see if that works.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see it, Chris? Yes, huh?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is, as you can see, there's all the other chapters in there already, which is all the content we finished, like basically the iOS 16 version of that. And so let me scroll through this quickly so that we can see some of the, yeah. So for example, here we have the state chapter. We added tons of these kind of diagrams, these state diagrams to explain better what happens there behind the scenes with add state and add state object, add observed object. And now with the new observable macro, this will be in there as well. So we have lots of illustrations here. And then when we go down further, here's the layout chapter. This also has lots of diagrams with layout steps and lots of other. So this kind of stuff became really easy for us now to render these kind of views, because it's all just SwiftUI views that we can render here. So we have lots of examples there, how the layout works. And let me see, scroll down a bit further. Here we go into alignment. So
this is my favorite part by far.
Yeah. Yeah, so we tried to add a lot of visual things to help with understanding this, to get away from too much text explanation, and to add something for the more visual types as well. And let me see, environment, that's mainly just view trees, animations. Yeah, so here's the animations chapter. There we also worked quite a while on all kinds of different ways of visualizing that. And so we have diagrams in here. It's always difficult in a book to talk about animations, but we think it's much better, definitely, than what we had before. That's for sure. It's still difficult in a book format, but we have a lot of these diagrams in here that show what happens there. And what else? We have this advanced layout chapter, where we also show. Let me see, where is this? Let's go up a little.
Maybe also in between while you are looking for something. So we literally rewrote every single chapter. There's, I think, nothing we copied out of the old book. Like we basically rewrote every single chapter completely from scratch, because that's how much we learned from doing these workshops over the years.
Yes. So the original plan actually was to just do an update. Right? We started like that, and we went through the chapters. We thought, okay, what do we have to change? What do we have to add? And then we quickly realized that we just could do a much better job, we hope, by the experience we had from the workshops. And so I think it's really, we rewrote everything from scratch. There's nothing copied, I think so as well.
Yeah.
And
there's
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a few more questions. So James has a really good question that takes a little bit longer to answer, so I'll push that back a little bit. Franklin asks, are you going to keep state object in the book? And yes, so state object is necessary unless you target iOS 17 only. And so we will be adding the whole new state stuff to the book, but first in a separate chapter. And we will also keep our state chapter, which basically describes sort of the old way, the current way of doing things. And at every point where it makes sense, we'll add a pointer saying like, hey, in iOS 17, this and this changed. But the reality is that most people we speak to still have the target of an iOS 15 or even lower. So we cannot really throw it out, and also we cannot really not mention all the new stuff. So it's a little bit hard for us to do this right, and especially since the new stuff might still change. Like I cannot imagine them really doing a different way of implementing the state system, like compared to what they showed at WWDC. But let's see. So we'll have both in there.
Yeah. Maybe another quick question in between is about our release strategy. Yeah, the chapters we publish are basically done. So they will change at some point when iOS 17 is out of beta, because we will integrate the iOS 17 content into the main chapters, but that will not really affect the content in any kind of essential sense. It might restructure things a little bit, but because we are keeping this separate for now. But other than that, chapters are done that we put out.
Yes, and I think with regard to the second part of that question, you can totally start reading, like, and the chapters will release them in sequence. So you can start reading this chapter, maybe, and once you finish, hopefully we'll have the next chapter ready. So we won't do like chapter 8 after this. It will be chapter 2, 3, 4. The only separate chapter that we'll include after this update is in every subsequent update, we'll have a separate iOS 17 chapter where sort of all of the iOS 17 changes are grouped for now, because that way we can sort of keep all those changes isolated, keep them up to date as the API evolves. And then once we know sort of where everything ends up, then we'll integrate that into the main text, and we can do another few steps of copy editing there. And yeah, so with regard to James, there was also another question about geometry readers and preferences. So maybe we can combine the two a little bit. So the question is,
maybe do you want to start with the question from the chat, and then I can see if I can text something onto the end of that with regard to the other preference question.
Yes. So the question is, have you noticed bugs with preference keys within a scroll view with a VStack or a lazy VStack? I find that items that monitor the size using the geometry reader in overlay don't get read sometimes. It's always I think most of the time preference keys seem to work for us, and there aren't very many surprises. Within a scroll view, it's a little bit different. We haven't used it that much, or maybe not found the bugs that you mentioned. But the thing is that if you have let's say a list or a scroll view with a lazy VStack, there will only be preference values that propagate up for the sort of the views that are on screen, and maybe a little bit more. So sort of a little buffer at the top and the bottom of the screen if you have a vertical scroll view. And so let's say you have like 1,000 items and you have a lazy VStack within a vertical scroll view, then maybe only for the first 10 items, the preferences will propagate up. And as you scroll further, like maybe item 1 and 2 go out of bounds, and then those preferences don't propagate up anymore either. At least this was the case when we last tested this. And we used this actually to know which views were on screen. So that's the views where we had the preferences from. All the other views were off screen. So this is one way to sort of measure that. Like, I think now with the new scroll view APIs, maybe this is easier, but that's what we use, and sort of relied on the fact that it works like this. And I don't know if we found any bugs in particular. I don't think so.
I can't recall any instance where we really couldn't make sense out of the behavior of preferences. In the end, we didn't have anything where we would say it's a bug, but it's also, that might also be due to the work we do, right? So I don't know, our scope of things that we do with SwiftUI is kind of limited, because we are more in the explaining business than the developing large apps business. So that's always a thing to consider. But in our work, we haven't seen anything that we couldn't make sense of.
Yeah, we don't build massive apps with like lots of items and scroll views and like have it in production. Like, we'll do that, but we'll make it work for us, and so we have very different constraints from most app developers.
Yeah. And so maybe let me, with regard to preferences, let me jump to another question that we got on in the GitHub repository, in the issues over there. And Ulf asked a question about dragging and using preferences to propagate this live position of a drag view up. And that so we looked at that again. We tried it, and so that definitely works. So you can if you should. It's a different question. It depends what you're trying to do. But if you want to use preferences to propagate, for example, the position of a view that's being dragged live, that definitely works. We verified that today again. And the other approach that Ulf took was to use bindings, which is of course also completely fine. It really depends what you are trying to achieve there. But preferences definitely work for live updates like that.
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe.
Then yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So let me see. There's another question about the new observation APIs and no major updates for Combine for years. Do we think it's dead? Well, I don't know if it's dead. Lots of people are using it, so I think it will be around for quite a while. To me, it always seemed kind of an unloved child in a way that Apple put out there, and kind of an intermediate thing. Like, I don't know. It was, to me, it always seemed a little bit strange, and it never got this kind of attention that you would expect from something big and new from Apple like that. Kind of, this is our new pattern, it never really happened that way, and they used it here and there, but yeah, I don't know. I think it will probably lose relevance over time. And SwiftUI basically cuts its dependency on Combine with the new observation API. So we'll see. I don't know. We don't have any insight into that, but it seems like that it's kind of being or it's at least getting more niche.
Maybe it'll be used for the headset, right? For the Vision Pro. I don't know. It's very hard to predict, but yeah, I also would say like it feels like the Vim mode in Xcode that didn't get any updates either last year and this year, which I'm very sad about. Yeah, it's hard to predict, and maybe yeah, I think we can see if we can do a little bit of live coding with the rotating effect animation by Alejandro. It's a very good question. Let's see if I can pull that up for you. Maybe you can do like a quick question in between, and I can prepare here.
Yes. So let's see. We have in the GitHub issues, we have a few things we can answer quickly. There's a recent question. Will we be doing videos like for the old edition? That's a good question. For now, like for this point in time, we decided not to do it and to focus on the iOS 17 stuff, things like that. Once everything has settled down there and this is all integrated into the book, we'll revisit this question. We don't know yet. We might also want to play around with a little bit different format than videos to do more interactive things. But that's all up in the air at the moment. Then some other questions that we got today here. There's something about binding transformations. We will queue that up for the next time because we didn't have time to look into that really. So we'll just keep that open for next week. There's also a question about improving performance in SwiftUI, which is very broad. I think we'll also keep this question open and see if we can share something about that next week or kind of the next Q&A, because then we will also have the state chapter out and the new so the state system in general and the new observation APIs for objects also, I think, play into this performance aspect nicely. I think there's a few things we can say about that, but it fits into this state topic, I think, for next time. So I'll just keep them open.
I think I'm ready here. Let's see.
Okay.
I'll make this a little bit smaller. I hope you can see my screen. I think so. Okay, so the question is basically over here. Let me pull it up. So this is No, it made it full screen. 1 sec. It's redragging in the Zoom controls. So this is basically the idea. Can we make like a control that keeps on looping, but always ends up in like basically the original state? And like imagine an activity indicator. You don't want the activity indicator to end up like twisted or something like that. So we have a little image over here. Let's see if it loads it up. And now we need to rotate it. And we tried this out, and this is quite tricky. Now it's not rotated, of course. So I'll make it title, make it a little bit bigger, and that's already better. And maybe give this entire thing a little bit of padding. And so to animate it is very easy. Like we can do something like this. State var toggle equals false, and then do an on appear and say toggle, and maybe do an animation rotation, like a linear animation that's maybe 1 second, and change it whenever the value of toggle changes. And then we do the rotation effect where if we're toggled, then we say degrees 360, otherwise 0. And so now it animates the first time it appears, right? And nothing else happens. And what we can also do is like this repeat forever and do auto reverse is false. And now it will repeat. Of course, because this is an SF symbol, this isn't nicely centered. Now the question is, how do you stop it? So I already have this binding in here, and we could do something with that maybe. So we could say is animating, then we do the animation, otherwise we have nil. And so now it still animates because we already had started that. We could do an ID even on here and say is animating, and that will make this into a new view. And now it will stop, but it doesn't stop like after turning the full rotation. Like it stops immediately and jumps back. And so this is quite tricky to do correctly in SwiftUI. And what we figured is you need some kind of either, as Alejandro mentioned, in the like a completion handler, or you need some kind of timer. And like it doesn't feel right to set up a combined publisher with timing events and stuff like that, or an NS timer, but we tried using a timeline view. So what you can do is have a timeline view and do it periodically from, well, let's say start time. So we can say, let's start time equals date.now, and do it every, let's say every second. And then here we get this context in, and inside the context, we can get the current time. So let's see, we'll indent this again. And well, this works like before, right? And what we can do is every time this date changes, we can actually animate once, right? Like, and that way we'll animate every second. So let me change this code a little bit. We keep the rotation effect, and we'll say, let's see, we have to create a property rotations. We'll delete this toggle property. And here we'll just say rotations times degrees 360. Okay, so now the only thing we still have to do is increment this rotations value. So we're not doing a repeat forever animation. We'll just animate whenever rotations changes. And I'll delete the on up here. I'll put this padding over here. Okay, so let's see if this still works.
You still have the question mark from the ternary operator on line 15.
Oh yeah, that goes away. We don't need that. Okay, and let's resume the preview. Still not quite happy. So yeah, okay, so we need to do this init inside here. Okay, so now nothing happens, but what we can do is every time we get a new value of context.date, we can increase the rotations. So we can say rotations plus equals 1. And we have to say underscore in. So now it keeps on rotating. And the question is, what do we do to stop this? And so we can do that maybe outside here. So let's see. Well, the first thing we can do is we can check here. If we're animating, only then we increase the rotations. We're currently animating, and if I turn it off, it actually stops, right? And it stops at the right spot. The only thing is, I don't know if you can notice this over the live stream, but every time I turn on, maybe it helps if I make this a little bit slower. Let's make it 3 seconds. So you can see that initially it didn't animate, right? Like it stops, and if I turn it on, it starts again. But initially it didn't animate.
So you mean when the preview first renders, right? Or when you launch this project first, then it doesn't animate immediately, but only when the timeline view fires the second time.
So now you can see it takes, the preview shows up, but then it doesn't animate, right? And we can fix that with an onAppear. So we can say rotations plus equals 1. Now it animates immediately. And if I turn it off, it stops animating. And if I turn it on, it just finishes the animation. And when we tested this out, we also had some more code because the animation didn't start straight away when we changed the binding, but for some reason that worked this time around. So this is how we would do it. I don't know if that makes sense. It's definitely like not the most beautiful solution, but I think we sort of have to work with what we get, right? Like when we get SwiftUI. Before I close this window, are there any questions about this? Let's see. I'll read through the questions. Annoying, rotates backwards. Timeline view, yeah. So we actually have never used timeline view before ourselves, but I knew it existed, and we looked up how the SwiftUI lab does this. So that's always really, really good content. I think the website is well known, but probably in the case that people don't know about this is absolutely amazing. It's every single article is worth a read. It's really good. And yeah, here you go. Here's the timeline view article, and yeah, definitely look into that if you haven't done so. Is there a way to stop the timeline view when it's not animated? Yeah, so I don't know. So probably you can do something where you can do an ID on is animating, which causes the timeline view to be a new view, and then if it's animating, you can do stuff like that probably. Like this will take a little while to figure out. But yeah, there's probably a good way to do that.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a problem either. Like it depends what you are trying to do here, where you are trying to use that, but it doesn't have to be a problem if that is if this timeline view body basically is executed like once a second, because it's just constructing a view struct, and if nothing has changed, the entire render tree / attribute graph will not be touched for this part, and this should be super cheap. But it definitely, of course, depends into what kind of thing you're planning to expand this simple example in a real world app.
Yes. Okay, there's a longer question about binding transformation. I think we'll have to read
that up
through
next
this.
week.
Yeah. And there's a nice question about if anything in our PostgresQL episodes is worth revisiting. Maybe, yeah, that's also something we'll have to read into. We haven't had the chance to prepare for that question. Yeah. I'm sure there are many things, like now with all the new stuff in Swift, I think it's there's so many things you can still improve to every line of code you wrote 2 years ago. One of the things we used, which was really fun also in our book rendering code, is we wrote a builder pattern similar to view builders, but for attributed strings. And similar to SwiftUI, there's like an environment that passes through, which contains the current styling. And so we can really easily mix and match like markdown, and in the markdown, we can interpolate other bits that can render to attributed strings. And I think that's why I was also so positive about the SwiftUI initial design. Like, we keep using the ideas from SwiftUI, like with the builder pattern, with the environment, and like the type keys in the environment and all of that. And we keep using this for all kinds of systems, and it always really helps to clean up the code and make things simpler. So I think, yeah, there's definitely seems to be a lot of genius in there. Yeah.
There's a question: what's your favorite SwiftUI announcement from this year's WWDC?
You can go first.
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know if there's anything specific. In general, I was really happy to see that there is work happening on SwiftUI, like serious things, right? I felt the last years, I felt a little bit like, okay, there's a little bit here, some new features there, a new API here, but it all felt a little bit like it's stalled a bit or something, or people were just busy on other projects, I'm not sure. And I feel still that this year there was a lot of things that are like the new observation APIs, which is quite a nice change, and a lot of other small things that make our lives easier. So I generally just appreciated that there was good progress on SwiftUI this year.
Yeah. So we don't, like, we haven't had the time to fully dive into everything yet, obviously. Like the way we approach things is we really try to understand them before we write or publish anything about it, if possible. And so we're not in the business of turning out as many articles as quickly as possible. And so the thing we looked into, which is the observation with like that. I don't know if I like the observation part itself, but the way they restructured the APIs is really nice. Like now you don't have state object, environment objects, and observed objects anymore. I mean, you still have them, but they're you don't need to use them anymore. And now there's a unified API, right? Like you can have just values and it's all fine, or you can have state if you want the state to be managed, whether or not that's an object or a value type, and you can have the environment for passing down either values or objects down the environment. And I think that makes it a lot simpler. And one of the insights we had while we were discussing this is that previously, if you use something like state object, it sort of couples both the lifetime as well as the observation. So the state object is making sure that a object gets created for that view, and it also observes that view automatically. So that's very tightly coupled. And now these things are completely orthogonal, right? Like you have state to control the lifetime, and then the observation happens when you actually read a property. So that makes a lot of sense, and I think it will clear up a lot of confusion and
that we can use
mistakes.
that because there's a question if there are any spoilers of what's coming for Swift Talk, and we are actually planning to record a few episodes next week on the observation things. And what we want to do, and I think what will work, is we want to basically re-implement it ourselves. Like, of course, we cannot integrate it into SwiftUI like Apple does, but we want to build up this mechanism, this kind of replicate this magic, right? It's kind of magic how this works, and we want to do that ourselves to make this really clear what's going on there. And so that's something we want to record next week. And
yeah, and
there's also
to add to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, to add to that, like there's a bunch of macro stuff in there as well, right? And so we want to see if we can get that to work. We had a little bit of a hard time getting macros to work with Xcode and importing, and like it's all kinds of magical syntax you need at first when you don't know what you're doing. But I think we figured it out, and I think we can now get to that part as well.
We already got a great book title suggestion for 2024 from Franklin, Thinking in Swift Macros. So
yeah. I wonder what's going to happen with the macros, because there's so much code that could be replaced with macros, but then like there's a whole, like at first it seems like a good idea for every single piece of code, but once, you know, there's a whole bunch of macros, it's gonna be, it has the potential to also sort of make things very complicated. So let's see. I think that with everything, we'll have to learn how to use them and when not to use them also.
Yeah.
Florian, do you have any plans for a Swift data book?
Not at the moment. We'll see. So currently we're just focusing on the core SwiftUI content basically with a book, and we did a lot of work around the workshops there. Let's see. We have some ideas about doing some more, let's say, branching out from some of the things we do in Thinking in SwiftUI and expanding in different formats there. But we haven't really looked into the new data things personally yet in any meaningful way. So we'll see. Okay. Do we still have anything left in the issues? I think no, everything that's there we'll keep for next time. And
yeah, I'll check if there's anything on Mastodon, but let's see. No. Yeah, there's a question if there's an upgrade price for the owners of the previous edition. So because we put in so much work for this book, we decided to just make it a paid upgrade. And anybody who cannot afford it or who bought the book recently, just send us an email and we'll make it a free upgrade. And we don't want to do like discounts, like that makes it just too complicated. So if you like it and if you can afford it, please vote with your wallet. And if not, just let us know and we'll get it to you for free.
Exactly. Okay. I guess let's wrap it up for today. If you want to send us any questions, please file them as issues in this GitHub repository, and please be as specific as possible with the questions. So if you have if you have an example, if you can reduce it to a simple example that we can get through in reasonable time, that's always the best way to get to the questions. But other than that, thanks for showing up. That was fun. And we'll do that again next week, next Friday.
Cool.
So have a good day, everybody, or a nice evening, depending where you are. So, and have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.